Well, it is day 75 in the impeachment inquiry, and a busy one at that. Today, the House Judiciary Committee released this report on grounds for impeachment. The original document was written during the Nixon impeachment process. It was updated during Clinton's inquiry, now updated again fairly extensively, preparing now for the case against Donald Trump, 55 pages long. Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler released a statement saying the framers' worst nightmare is what we are facing in this very moment. If you could tell, it's a working weekend for Nadler and his team on the Hill. Go time is Monday, the next impeachment hearing, 9 a.m. Eastern on Monday. And today, we learned the names of those who were presenting that in that hearing, counsels for both the Judiciary and Intelligence Committees, Republican and Democrats. The White House announced it will not participate in the hearings, but the president suggested today that his personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, could send a report to Congress.
He did get back from Europe just recently, and I know he has not told me what he's found, but I think he wants to go before Congress and say, and also to the Attorney General and the Department of Justice, I hear he's found plenty.
Giuliani visited Ukraine, as you heard the president alluding to, this week. He talked about the investigation in an interview this morning.
I feel a great deal of frustration that the Southern District of New York allows an article to be written that I'm being investigated for bribery, and Joe Biden hasn't been asked a question in a grand jury about what is a clear, absolute, 100% admission of a bribery.
NBC News asked Giuliani what he hoped to accomplish in Ukraine. He responded saying, quote, "I will reveal it when I'm ready, and if this doesn't shake up the swamp and get us to the cut out the years of corruption, I might then agree with those who say it's hopeless." We'll get to all that, but first, a look now at the case that Democrats are making this week against Donald Trump.
The president abused his power for his own personal political benefit at the expense of our national security by withholding military aid and crucial Oval Office meeting in exchange for an announcement of an investigation into his political rival. The president's actions have seriously violated the Constitution, especially when he says and acts upon the belief, Article 2 says I can do whatever I want. No, his wrongdoing strikes at the very heart of our Constitution, a separation of powers, 3 co-equal branches, each a check and balance on the other. The president has engaged in abuse of power, undermining our national security and jeopardizing the integrity of our elections. I am asking our chairman to proceed with articles of impeachment.
What has happened in the case today is something that I do not think we have ever seen before. A president who has doubled down on violating his oath to faithfully execute the laws and to protect and defend the Constitution.
President Trump has committed impeachable high crimes and misdemeanors by corruptly abusing the office of the presidency.
After reviewing the evidence that's been made public, I cannot help but conclude that this president has attacked each of the Constitution's safeguards against establishing a monarchy in this country. If what we're talking about is not impeachable, then nothing is impeachable.
Is it fair to say that all 3 causes for impeachment explicitly contemplated by the founders, abuse of power, betrayal of our national security, and corruption of our elections, are present in this president's conduct? Yes or no, Professor Feldman?
Yes.
And Professor Gerhardt?
Yes, sir.
And Professor Carlin?
Yes.
You all agree?
Some of the highlights from this week. So let's bring in our panel. Jonathan Allen, NBC News digital national political reporter. Ann Gearin, Washington Post White House correspondent and MSNBC contributor. Robert Tsai, professor of law at American University. Jonathan, let's get straight to what's new today. And that's basically how they plan on defining impeachment, right? The very words, supposedly, that Chairman Nadler is saying, this is how we're going to decide. 55 pages long. What sticks out in it to you?
I mean, I think we basically got a feeling from that hearing the other day, and some of the clips that you just showed there.
Yeah.
We're basically looking at abuses of power, and as those law professors laid out, to shorten what they said, they essentially said it's as if the president looked at the words the Constitution uses for impeachment and sought to exploit them as much as he possibly could.
And a part of that here, Ann Guerin, is the discussion potentially here of Mueller, obstruction of justice. When you look through some of the pages and the statements that the Democrats have used in this 55-page, here is what we plan on doing.
Yeah, Richard, a number of Democrats have dropped some pretty broad hints that the articles, the full articles, when they're drafted, are likely to include references to the things that Robert Mueller says in his report, and Mueller comes quite close to saying the president abused his office and veered against criminal conduct in that report. But as we all know, Mueller stopped short of putting a fine point on that or making any specific recommendations about what should happen as a result of his findings. He left that to Congress. These many months later, it appears that at least part of what will be considered at the end of this process will involve the Mueller findings. Mm-hmm. And of course, let's remember that some of the Mueller findings overlap a bit with what happened later with Ukraine, just simply because Mueller dealt with foreign interference in an election involving Russia. And this set of allegations involves the idea that Trump would say that the 2016 election was meddled in by Ukraine rather than Russia, which sort of would, that's his do-over for the Mueller report. Mm-hmm. And the allegation that he was seeking further interference in the upcoming election to benefit him by having the Ukrainians investigate a political rival.
When we look at that broad possibility discussion, points that may be made and have been made here, Robert, when we look at this current report and we look at the Nixon report, you're the law person here, right, if you will. What stands out to you between the comparison of these two documents?
It looks like you've got the representatives in the House really trying to lay the groundwork for obstruction of justice or obstruction of the House's constitutional functions kind of article of impeachment. So you do see repeated references to Richard Nixon's cooperation. President Nixon, while he was undergoing impeachment, allowed his high aides to testify. They submitted documents. Although some of the tapes, of course, the transcripts were incomplete, but by comparison, President Nixon was incredibly cooperative, and what you see in the report here is an effort to lay out a real effort with what they call a strong pattern of obstruction on the part of President Trump from the top. They got a long list in the first report from the Intelligence Committee, detailing all of the people who were subpoenaed, who have refused to comply categorically. So I think we'll definitely see that comparison be drummed from here on out.
So that was new today. Jonathan, also new today. Rudy Giuliani potentially presenting a report. We just saw what the president was saying. We also saw what Rudy Giuliani made claims of. This goes back to Ukraine, goes back to Biden. Fact check that as well, as in, you heard what he said a little bit earlier, and the possibility of him presenting a report to Congress.
I mean, it's very strange for Rudy Giuliani, who is who's in the center of this story, right, to be going to Ukraine right now. This is, a couple of his associates have been detained and arrested on their way out of the country, who have been charged in this case. And here's Rudy Giuliani heading over to the scene of the alleged crime to gather new evidence to try to bring back. This is as if you had a couple of associates who were charged with bank robbery, and you decided to go into the house into the bank that they had been alleged to have broken into, and decided that you were going to find some evidence there. I mean, this is a very, very odd situation that Giuliani has injected himself into, that the president is now injecting himself into. And let's remember that also in this case, that when the president was found to, or when the president was accused, I should say, by the whistleblower of having done this arms for dirt deal in the first place, it was not until the whistleblower had come forward that the White House started to become, let's say, the White House started to have some justification for having held back that money, that all of a sudden there was this new evidence that came forward for why they were holding back funding for Ukraine. So it might be worth looking at Giuliani going over to Ukraine, looking for new evidence in light of that context of a White House that has a pattern of finding new evidence once it's caught doing something.
So then, and Garen, what does this say about the relationship that the president has with his personal attorney? And we've been discussing that. Clearly, he has made a trip that, as Jonathan so well analogized for us, is, you know, if you are accused of robbing a bank, you go back to the bank that you're accused of robbing. That's sort of a very interesting, we'll use that word right now, incident that Giuliani's involved in today as we're going through an impeachment inquiry.
Yeah, I mean, I think a number of things are clear here, starting with the fact that Rudy Giuliani's job appears to be safe, at least for a bit. There was an awful lot of speculation going back a couple of months now that Rudy Giuliani's days were numbered as the president's attorney because he appeared to be causing additional problems for the president when he already had a whole lot of them to deal with. However, the fact that Giuliani has the president's ear, continues to have the president's ear, and does a thing that the president very much likes and does it well, which is he is a bulldog in defense of President Trump. He goes on television, he tweets, he runs around New York City, and now he's running around Ukraine in defense of the president very publicly. And that is something Trump wants to see in his defenders. And it suggests that Giuliani is here to stay, at least for a bit. And the other is that, you know, that President Trump actually really appears to believe some of what is often generously called an unproved or even baseless conspiracy theory about Ukrainian involvement in 2016 and further, that the Ukrainians were trying to game the then vice president, Joe Biden, by hiring his son. There is no evidence that any of those things are true. And in fact, the idea that Ukraine interfered in the 2016 election has been fact-checked by NBC, by the Washington Post, by maybe 50 other organizations and fact-checking groups, and found not to be the case. So I don't know what Giuliani is going to come back with and attempt to present to Congress, but we can see that he and that set of allegations will be a main talking point for the Republicans. So let's see. The Republicans will probably end up calling him.
You know, Robert, what do you make of this?
I think it's going to put enormous pressure on how the senators run this trial. And when we get over to the Senate side of things, the rules are going to be interesting and somewhat complicated because the Chief Justice will preside, of course, but the truth is, while the chief might be asked to make rulings about subpoenas and evidentiary questions, that's subject to a vote by the entire Senate. And so it would only take a single senator to request, or the president's lawyers to request a subpoena for Giuliani, or to ask that a committee be appointed to take testimony from Giuliani. And so, but I think there'll be senators who won't want the proceedings to turn into the kind of circus that we saw on the Republican side. So this is going to be quite something to watch them navigate the formalities and the partisan pressures.
And that's a great setup, because we're going to talk more about that later in the show, what 51 votes means, what 67 votes means, as this does make it over to the Senate. Jonathan Allen and Garen, Robert Tsai, we'll see you a little bit later this hour. Thanks so much.